There are good things on this bill, but I have to say the government's let itself down.
Chris Farfoy.
Mr Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to Part 4 of the Road User Charges Bill. This part of the bill does set out the infringements that can be imposed upon anyone who transgresses in terms of the new regime for the road user charges. And looking at 67B here, in the case of an individual, it's a fine of $15,000 or more. In the case of a body corporate, it is in the area of $75,000 or more. And Mr Chair, in terms of whatever fine is imposed upon a person or a body corporate, the accuracy of the regime and the fairness of the regime is going to be paramount. And I guess in terms of that we do have some reservations, especially given that part of the evidence that can be used that we saw in Part 3 was the electronic monitoring system that can be used to track RUCs, especially when last month that electronic system essentially packed up. So we do think that maybe in terms of the law and the practicality of the bill as it stands now, there may be some way to go, and that we may be slightly ahead of ourselves in terms of being able to have an accurate measure of how some of these RUCs are going to be calculated in terms of the infringements in Part 4 that may be imposed upon some people. And in terms of that electronic management system, last month, vehicle owners were not able to renew their registrations or update their road user charges or change of ownership details at the New Zealand Post Shop. So some serious questions need to be asked about the reliability of that in terms of being able to use that as evidence to put infringement notices upon a company or an individual. Mr Chair, this goes back down to the fairness and accuracy of the new system moving from nominated weights to the gross weights, and the fairness of that. Mr Chair, there is some major concern from some people and some companies within the industry as to whether the accuracy is actually going to be accurate. And instead of being accurate and fair, Mr Chair, and instead of being accurate and accurate and fair, there's something. The provisions within this bill are basically another muddle through to make sure that we can catch everyone. And I do have an honest question for the Minister, who I understand is leaving the chair at the moment. Is just the level of evasion that does occur within the industry at the moment, the percentage, and just how much of a problem that there is at the moment. Mr Chair, I'd also like to turn to an issue that my colleague Darian Fenton was talking about in terms of the setting out of the level of the RUC now, and the fact that will no longer have any public scrutiny, and that this will now be done by regulation. Mr Chair, as my colleague said, this does break with the principle that there should be no taxation without representation, and there is major concern on this side of the House that there will be no scrutiny of that. And I believe at the select committee stage, in terms of final numbers available for scrutiny to make sure that the law could proceed, those weren't available. And I understand that the actual charges are going to be set by officials at some later date. So, and this is in terms of what my colleague Darian Fenton was getting to. How can we scrutinise this part of the bill around the setting of the level of road user charges when in fact we don't know what they are? So, Mr Chair, they are two major concerns around infringement and the fact that these new charges are going to be set by regulations that we have issued with in Part 4. Mr Chair, going back to my original point around infringements, $15,000 and $75,000, I don't think we're going to have any major problem around that. But again, I'd just like to reiterate the fact that we do need to have an accurate measure of the evasion within the industry, because if we don't have that, we may be fixing a problem that doesn't actually exist. It does. So in that respect, we do ask whether or not, in terms of this, whether or not there was actually a problem that needed to be fixed in a manner that is going to massively increase the amount of road user charges that some of our truckers are going to have to pay. And in terms of that, Mr Chair, there is serious concern within the industry, and they made their voices heard in the select committee. And I have glanced over a number of the submissions that were made at the Select Committee stage, and there is real concern about the level of RUCs that some companies are going to have to face.
Very much, Mr Chair. I'd just like to make